Justice worked, and I think this podcast is very timely given what's going on in America and in Washington now. And I think those who are listening or have listened to the podcast, as I have, will see some very poignant and interesting parallels between what happened then and what appears to be happening now. It is sort of a deja vu moment. I mean, that was 45 years ago. We three prosecutors were kids. I was 29 in 1973. I was I think by 1 year, the youngest of the group. But we were all clumped around the same age group. We were kids, and we didn't set out to prosecute the Vice President of the United States. You know, George Beall, the U.S. Attorney, had put together a team with the purpose of looking into allegations and rumors of public corruption in Maryland. There were rumors about zoning behavior, criminal behavior having to do with zoning in Baltimore County, that people were bribing public officials to get zoning changed from residential to commercial so the property could be built on, and so on. So our expectation was if we did our job right, and if the facts were there and we could uncover them, that we would be finding perhaps some corrupt public officials locally in Maryland. We had no notion that this case would not only result in that, because there were public officials as a result of the investigation that we did prosecute, but that we would wind up prosecuting the Vice President of the United States. And not only that, we'd be doing that in the midst of Watergate. What prosecutors do, white-collar prosecutors do, is they start investigating people on the lower rungs of the corrupt ladder, and either indicting and trying or cutting deals with those people. And several of the individuals who had been involved with Agnew, two bagmen, some people who paid directly, became our cooperating witnesses. So not only did we have their testimony, but we had documents. You know, these crimes are crimes involving records and the movement of money, and you know, the phrase is follow the money.
Yeah, right.
And we had a small team of wonderful IRS agents who assisted us, one of whom lives in Talbot County, a guy named Erwin Crandall, who moved here. And I just saw him recently. This is like, you know, Old Home Week. The podcast have brought us together. Well, what happened was Agnew was greedy. Someone somewhere must have told him, don't take directly. Get an intermediary. That's the bagman of the Rachel Maddow podcast. That way you have some deniability. And Agnew did that. He had two bagmen. But if somebody was going to give him enough money, he took directly. So he was careless. So we had not only bagmen, we had direct payers, we had records, and he did take cash in envelopes while he was vice president in the White House. When we heard the story from the guy who paid the bribe, how he went into the vice president's office, and the vice president, I think I remember this accurately, pointed to the ceiling like, let's not talk about this. And this person took an envelope stuffed with cash out of his suit jacket and gave it to the vice president, who slid it in his desk drawer. I mean, by the fall of 1973, I think it was a foregone conclusion that Richard Nixon was not going to stay in the White House, that he was not going to be able to finish his term because of Watergate. And here we were with a case not yet brought but under investigation against the man who was about to become the president. And then that raises the issue of immunity. Agnew had some very able lawyers, and among the things that they raised was the issue of whether or not a sitting vice president is immune from prosecution. There's no law yet on the question of whether either a sitting president or a sitting vice president is immune from prosecution while in office. The Justice Department has internally offered opinions about that. When Spiro Agnew's lawyers raised the issue of immunity for him as a sitting vice president, the Justice Department, through Robert Bork, who was the Solicitor General at the time, turned them down and said, no, a president, it may well be immune from prosecution, but a vice president isn't. And then there's the open question, is a president immune from prosecution while in office? And there is no law on that. And that's part of the podcast, which of course is relevant to some of what's going on now. We, the prosecutors, Barney, Timmy, and myself, and I think those that our superiors in the Justice Department, all were of the view that a vice president should not be and was not cloaked with immunity. But this vice president was about to become president. And the argument for a president being cloaked with immunity while in office is a much stronger argument. And that was the $100 chip, the get out of free jail card that Vice President Agnew had. He didn't want to go to jail. He told his lawyers he didn't want to go to jail. And the deal that was made after a lot of to and froing, internally as well, between the three young prosecutors and Elliot Richardson, the Attorney General at the time, and Henry Peterson, the Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division. It took a while to get there. And there's another person who lives in Talbot County who was involved in all of this, and that's a guy named J.T. Smith, who was Attorney General Elliot Richardson's administrative assistant, one of two. So J.T. is here, Ron Liebman is here, and former IRS agent Erwin Crandall is somewhere down the road. Prosecutors argue long and hard that Agnew should be treated like anyone else and should go to jail. But the fascination of the case, given the time that it was in, was what we talked about a moment ago, about the fact that this guy was about to become president of the United States through Richard Nixon's downfall. And it is a tribute to Attorney General Richardson, who heard us out, these kids, time and time again for hours and hours and hours, until he convinced us with the benefit of his statesmanship and his experience and his brilliance and his maturity of thought that he was right, that this country had to get this case behind it. And if that meant this extraordinary result where Agnew would plead nolo contendere rather to a felony, but be assured of no jail time, that's what the country needed. And he was 100% right, and my Barney and Timmy will tell you the same thing. It was a long, long process for us. You know, we were kids and we're bringing this case and we're in the weeds. And we are idealistic. We want everyone to be equal before the law. Elliot Richardson was right. He convinced us of it, and that's what happened. I think I speak for my colleagues. We never had a self-doubt. We put together a full, comprehensive case. We nailed him. He was careless. We had a great team of prosecutors and IRS agents, and we put together a very persuasive case. I was convinced of it then, and 45 years later, I'm convinced of it now. No, we are still a country of laws, and we're still a country with a moral fiber that runs through it. And you know what's going on now is far from complete. We don't know how it's going to end, but if the Agnew case and Watergate teaches anything 45 years later, it's that there's a system of laws in this country, there's a moral fiber in this country, and so far, you know, the result, even though it may wind a bit and take some detours and some dead and false ends, ultimately the law is obeyed. And I have very little doubt that no matter what happens in current events, that ultimately will be the result.